obviously, because now you will be done with this class. But just in case, if you want to remember the things that we have discussed in this class sometime in the future, then I think it will help to keep these videos somewhere safe. Now, as we said, it's helpful. Okay, thank you, Omar. And anytime you can come back to these videos and refresh your memory. Of course, I'm not as comfortable as I would be in a regular classroom. I'm not good in sharing some visuals with you. We cannot use the board here. Actually, I have a whiteboard in my apartment. I just don't know how I can effectively use it. Because with this camera, you may not be able to see what I read right there. So I'm not using it. But hopefully, if you want to hear what we have talked about ethnic politics in these videos, they will be accessible even after the class. So you can anytime come back and watch them. And with that, I restarted the recording and we can start our class discussion. And since this is our last class day, let's see the big picture a little bit. What we have done in this semester was to look at different aspects of ethnic politics. We talked about the definitions first. We started by defining ethnicity, race, nationality, and nationalism, and nations. All these related concepts, at least all these semantic neighbors. They had pretty much close meanings, depending on the context. And then we talked about the relationship between ethnic politics and international relations, ethnic politics and domestic politics, ethnic politics and economic politics, especially economic policies of protectionism. And that was another chapter in our class. And then finally, over the past couple of weeks, we have covered ethnic mobilization. And we said that we can distinguish different kinds of ethnic mobilizations by two criteria. The first one was the goals of mobilizations, whether they are separatist or not, whether they are minimalist or maximalist, how much demand they have, how much uniqueness, how much separation, how much autonomy they demand on cultural, economic, and political lines. Sometimes some ethnic group organizations demand special treatment to make it up for past injustices, which they believe they faced in the past. Sometimes they just want equality. They just want the state not to interfere, but sometimes they want active state involvement in favor of the group. And some of these goals we said were political, like secession at the maximum level, but just basic voting rights at the minimum level. And then we said some of them are economic, some special tax regulations, sometimes some special payments to the ethnic group members, but sometimes just, again, no state intervention in the economic activities across different ethnic lines. And also we said they might have cultural goals. At the minimum level, they may ask for just, I don't know, some freedom to practice their culture. It might be their language, it might be their faith-based activities. And as more maximalist demands, such ethnic organizations might demand, let's say, official recognition for their mother tongue, for their native language. They might ask for the country to embrace a bilingual structure in the education, the schools, in the constitution. So these are cultural, economic, and political demands from minimalist to maximalist ranks. The second way to distinguish mobilizations, we said, was the methods of them, whether they are peaceful or violent. And you can even specify further. If they are peaceful, it might be voting, it might be demonstration, it might be petitions, all different kinds of mobilization. But beyond that, what matters most in the literature is whether they use violent methods or not. If they use violent methods, that might be riot, rebellion, terrorism, guerrilla warfare, and often a mixture of them. Often if you are using one, the other one follows. So, and from here, I think we can conclude our discussion on the demand side. There are two sides in this story. There is one ethnic group, which is not the majority of the society, which is a minority. And by minority, I mean two things. One is the formal minority status. Some ethnic groups are defined as such in the legal framework of the host country. They are defined as minority ethnic group. In the case of Turkey, let's say we have which groups are minority in Turkey constitutionally? Any ideas on that? Yes, Ali Osman, religious groups. So Turkey does not accept Muslim communities as minority. This is what Turkey decided in Lausanne Treaty, in the founding treaty of the Republic. So the Greek Orthodox people, Armenians of Turkey, the Jewish people of Turkey, they are recognized as minorities. In different countries, you have different minority statuses given to given to a number of ethnic groups. So we said that there are two sides in this story. One is the demand side, which comes from the minority ethnic group, which might be designated, recognized as minority legally, but also sometimes we call groups a minority group from a sociological point of view, not because they are defined as such in the constitution, but because they have a distinct culture, and in terms of their numbers, they are in minority. Again, minority also implies lack of power, not just a body count, not just a head count, but also lack of power. So that group is in minority in terms of its number, in terms of its population, but also the group does not have, let's say, some privileges in the country. Sorry, that was my fault. So that's the demand side. A minority ethnic group making demands. Those demands might be political, cultural, or economic. They might be maximalist or minimalist. And there's all the other side of this story, which is the supply side. In other words, what does the state do vis-a-vis a respective ethnic group? How does the state treat an ethnic group? And here you can think about that, let's say, in a linear spectrum. This is the conventional wisdom in the literature. And they treat it as whether the state is inclusive or exclusionary for the respective ethnic group. And sometimes they don't use these words like inclusive versus exclusionary, but sometimes they use the words as permissive versus repressive. I will just type them here in case you cannot hear me well. Inclusive versus exclusionary, or permissive versus repressive. It's not a one-to-one match. So exclusionary systems may not be physically repressive, or we can find different words for permissive instead of inclusive. Because sometimes inclusive systems are not just permissive, but they are also encouraging. They are also, providing some special favors for certain ethnic groups. So it's more than just permitting them, it's also helping them, assisting them. But usually we see such linear spectrums when it comes to ethnic group treatments by the state. But what I will tell you now is will not be just this linear spectrum. I want to talk about some categories of treatment of ethnic groups. I will talk about 4 categories that will be based on my article that I assigned for this week. But even if you have not had the opportunity to read it, we will summarize it now. So we can think about it 4 ways. The first, actually we can talk about it. We can start with a 2-way distinction first, and from this 2-way distinction, we can reach up to 4 categories. And these 2 ways are group level treatment and individual level treatment. Individual level treatment means how the state treats the members of an ethnic group. And who are the members? That's the first question. Sometimes members are registered as members of a specific ethnic group. In the census, the state asks people to identify themselves with an ethnic group. Sometimes the states do not even ask people to identify themselves, but there is an ascription. The state directly looks at the situation and says that you are this ethnic group, you are from that ethnic group, you are from that group. The state does the allocation. But mostly the state asks people, it leaves it to people's self-identification. And once you know, and the state knows your membership, your ethnic membership, then as an individual, how will you be treated by the state? In the article, I just talked about the political treatment, but you can also think about cultural and economic treatment. How does the state treat a person from a minority ethnic group on political, economic, and cultural dimensions? That's the first aspect, the individual level treatment of the state. The second aspect is the collective treatment. It's about collective rights. It's not about individual rights. Collective rights are stronger than individual level rights because they recognize the group as an entity. In other words, it reinforces the group boundaries. It says that that you are a unique group, you are a different entity from other groups. I will not look at this at the individual level, but at the group level, and I will designate some collective rights. These are 2 dimensions, individual level and group level. Let's give an example. At the individual level, if you have individual freedom to do anything with your ethnic identity, then you have the right to do anything and nothing about your ethnic identity. You might say, I don't care about my ethnic identity. I don't want to think about the world along the ethnic lines. I look at the world from, I don't know, from non-ethnic lines, which might be the traditional left versus right spectrum of politics. So in such cases, in individual level treatment, in individual level permissive systems, you can live your life inside your ethnic group, but also outside it. In places where there is collective recognition, in other words, when groups are granted autonomy, then they become in charge of their members. In places where the group has the autonomy and recognition granted from the state, then individual members are usually recognized as not individuals, but as members of a specific ethnic group. Right now, I know this is a little bit abstract, but in a bit we will give an example. So, but we said that we will reach up to 4 categories. Right now we have just 2, right? Individual level treatment and group level treatment. Each treatment, individual and group, they take 2 answers, yes or no. So does the state recognize the individual? Yes or no. Does the state recognize the group? Yes or no. And accordingly, does the state give rights to individuals and to groups? Yes and no. So from this, you get 4 answers. So for some ethnic groups, individuals are recognized, they are granted rights, but their groups do not have collective rights. So there is individual right, but no group right. In some groups, vice versa. The groups are recognized, they are given autonomy, but individuals are not recognized as such. They are recognized as members of ethnic groups, and their destiny rests in the hands of the ethnic elites. They decide about individuals' future. And there are other examples. In some ethnic groups, in some cases, we see that both the group and the individual recognized. So if individual wants, they can be included in the collective affairs of their ethnic group. But if they don't want it, they are free to go. And in some examples, neither individual nor the group is recognized. The state does not give right at the collective level and also at the individual level. So these are 4 categories, and I will give a name for each of them, and we will also give examples. Let's start with the most extreme example. The state takes an ethnic group. The state says that you guys are members of this ethnic group, this cultural community, and I don't give you any individual rights. I don't give you any collective rights. In other words, as an individual, you cannot participate in my society. You cannot cross-cut your ethnic line. You are stuck in your ethnic group. I will not accept you as an individual outside your box, out of your group. But also in your group, you will have no rights, because I will also not grant any rights to your group. So no rights at the group level, no rights at the individual level. What does it mean? Let's think about political rights. There might be cultural rights, there might be economic rights, but let's think about political rights. In such very repressive regimes, very exclusionary regimes, individuals are excluded from the centrist politics. If you are a minority ethnic group member, you cannot, let's say, vote for any party. I do not grant you voting rights. Even perhaps I don't grant you citizenship rights. But also your group at the collective level will not come to the bargaining table. I will also not recognize the group. They will also not get any political rights. An example of such extremely repressive regimes. In this example, let's say, if Turkey was such a system, what can we say? A Kurdish person wouldn't be able to vote for HDP. There would be no HDP. But also the Kurdish person wouldn't be able to vote for AK Party or CHP. They would have literally no voting rights. That's one example. But that's more like a fictional example. Any real life examples?
The case of Uyghur people in China?
Yes. What about them? Let's open up that. You want to open up that, Mustafa, or should we continue with somebody else? Okay, so Uyghur people, Mustafa's example. So you might think about this example. The problem with Uyghur people, we know very little about what's going on there. Probably not nice things, probably terrible things going on there. But the thing is, it's such a closed society, especially in inner parts, especially in Eastern Turkestan or in Xinjiang, as they call it. We don't know what's happening there. We don't know whether they are massacring people. We don't know whether they are brainwashing them. Really, we don't know. They just call them education camps. And the Chinese government got all these Uyghur Turks. We even don't know how many. We even don't know their population. The official figures are probably underrepresenting the true size of the population. But the thing is, they are being mistreated. That's for sure. We know that because some of them could get away. Some Uyghur Turks could escape, or some Uyghur diaspora could have some contact with their families. The contact lines are being cut, but before being cut, they could have a sense of what's going on there. So we know that that's very nasty. That's very brutish, the situation. So based on that, we can say it's extremely repressive. But this is a good example of this distinction between group level and individual level. What if, we don't know what's going on, but what if China says to Uyghur citizens that you are no longer Uyghur. Now you are a Han person, the majority of Chinese society, the Han ethnicity. I don't expect you as an Uyghur person. You are not member of that group anymore. You are not Muslim anymore. You don't speak Turkish anymore. I expect you a full Han citizen. If that is the case, you can vote for, I mean, that's the thing, that's not a democratic society, but you can vote for the Communist Party, let's say. You can work for the Communist Party. That's the form of political participation there. You can get a job. That's economic inclusion. I will give you a job. And culturally, you will not have access to your indigenous culture of Uyghur, but you can practice the Han culture. In other words, I allow you to leave your group. So that's the good example of the group level and individual level. In the individual level, you let people allow their group. You try to assimilate them. In Uyghur case, I don't think they will have a fair chance of political participation or economic participation, even if they denounce their ethnic background. But if that is the case, then we would say that individual level inclusive, you can leave your group, you can join the majority group, but group level exclusive, because your identity is under attack. That's the distinction. The most extreme example of this is the Jews of Nazi Germany. In that case, your group is specified. You are stuck in your group. There's no individual level inclusion. The Nazi state is not saying that, okay, Jews, denounce your identity and become fully German citizens. The Nazi state did not want that, because they thought that the Jews would destroy the purity of the German race, the Aryan race. They did not want that. So you cannot become a German. You cannot become an Aryan. You are Jew. You are stuck there. You need to be in that ghetto, physically and also culturally. So there is no individual level recognition. At the group level, again, there is no recognition. The Jewish community, the Jewish elites are not in the bargaining table. They are not negotiating. So this is individual level and group level exclusion in its most repressive way. Because forget about voting rights, they were even being killed in concentration camp. Any such examples? And by the way, the Uyghur case might be suitable to this story too. We know it's cultural genocide. We don't know whether they are being massacred. Probably if they resist, they might be tortured. I wouldn't be surprised. They might even be killed, executed. I wouldn't be surprised. But the problem with China is we know everything about Nazi Germany now. But we know so little about China and Uyghur Turks. That's the problem. Any examples of such extreme systems which does not allow individuals to leave their group, but also does not give any right to the group? Any examples you might think of? Such extremely exclusionary systems.
Hocam, students are using the chat box for examples.
Okay, it didn't move down. So now I see it. Okay. Yeah, you wrote a lot. By the way, I think it would be better if you talk rather than typing. Omar, let's start with you. That's a good example. I read it, but I would also like to hear it from you.
Yes, Hocam. The example I give is about the Gulf countries in which we see neither group level recognition nor individual level recognition, and both are extremely excluded from the political and cultural and social lives. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good example. For those who are not familiar with the practice in some Gulf countries, and by Gulf I mean the Persian Gulf or the Basra Gulf, no matter how you call it. So, in these oil-rich Gulf countries, might be United Arab Emirates, might be Saudi Arabia or Bahrain, maybe Qatar. So in such countries, there is a system called the velayet system. So the foreign workers start to work in these countries, and they are doing very heavy labor, by the way. And in order to work, they need a veli. They need somebody to be assigned to. They assign these people to their veli, to their patron. And those patrons, those veli people, they keep the passports. And then these workers, not always, but often are treated as slaves. They have no rights, sometimes being beaten by their patrons, sometimes being threatened because their passports are with their patrons. And at the group level, they have no representation, of course. Let's say the Bengali workers, the workers from Bangladesh, they are not treated as such. They are not a Bengali community. They don't have Bengali elites to negotiate in the table for the community. Also, as for individuals, they have no rights. And they are being tortured, not always, but there are many rumors and news on this. So individually, they are mistreated too. But that's also a very unique case because, to be frank on this matter, they are not citizens. And in the entire world, this is nation-state era, in the entire world, citizens and non-citizens do not have the same right. Non-citizens cannot vote. Non-citizens have no right, pretty much. Yes, if they are facing torture, they would sue the people that tortured them. So in this case, the Gulf states are really extreme. But this distinction between citizens and non-citizens is a universal rule. But that distinction is quite extreme in these Gulf states, in this example of Oman. Who knows about these Gulf states and their treatment? I am not very familiar on the matter. Who has some, I don't know, maybe insider opinion? Am I exaggerating the situation, or is it even more than? Is it even worse than this?
Actually, it's kind of similar because of many people who are working there. They don't have those rights because they are working like 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day without any medical assurances and everything, and they're getting less paid. So due to that, they are being treated very badly. They live in a very bad situation. So it's the way you explained it. Yeah, it is worse because for example, there are some Filipino housemaids. They are working and they are being tortured. Like they cannot go to their country, or they don't get those freedom while they are working. So it's kind of similar, like the way you pictured it.
Thank you, Rafi. By the way, this is very good insight. I forgot about that part. Yes, they work for very, very long hours. They are treated like slaves in that sense, and they are not allowed to call their home countries because they will report, they will complain, and their patrons do not even allow them to contact their families in their home countries, and many other measures of mistreatment, which is horrible. So there might be some benevolent patrons who do not mistreat their workers, but that's a structural problem. They have ability to mistreat them and nothing happens to them. And you might ask why these people are suffering then. They don't need to go there. Yes, they are going there voluntarily to work because the Gulf states are rich and they don't have jobs back in their home countries, in the Philippines, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Egypt. These are the primary sending countries. But many of them do not know how much they can be mistreated. Many of them face the situation there. And even if they want to go back, in some cases they cannot because their patrons do not give them their passports back. They say you need to finish your term. And sometimes they are not even being paid, or sometimes they are underpaid because their patrons say that they did not do a good job. So that's the thing. And in some cases, they go back, they run away. In some cases, they commit even suicide. This is quite an extreme situation. So Omar, Rafi, thank you for the comment. Ali Osman, Israel. Would you like to open that up? What about the situation in Israel?
So for the Israel case, even though they have officially recognized Arab citizens in Israel, they are, the rights of the Arabs in Israel is considered to be repressive because, economically they are under the Israeli citizens, or they are more discriminated in the society. So also they have got no rights in terms of political rights, like in the institutions. So in both ways, in individual cases also, they are not accepted as an Israeli citizen. Yeah, they are Israeli citizens, but they considered to be Arabs, so they are discriminated in individual level too. So it can be considered as ethnocracy, I think.
Yeah, very good example. But Israel is also a very complicated society because on one hand, you have the distinction between citizens and non-citizens. In the case of Arabs, some of them are not citizens, right? The ones who live in occupied territories, the ones who live in West Bank or in Gaza, they live in occupied territories. They are not citizens. They cannot vote for Israeli elections. But there are also Arabs with Israeli citizenship, not in those occupied territories, but in the rest of Israel. The ones who didn't leave Israel with Nakba, the ones who did not leave Israel in the foundation of the country. So those Israeli Arabs, they also face discrimination. There are reports for that because they are not seen as an equal Israeli citizen. If you are not coming from the Jewish ethnic background, then you are like a second-class citizen. There is such a hierarchy in the society. And they want to be left there. The Israeli state do not want them to get out of their communities. The Israeli state does not want different ethnic backgrounds to mix up. And with ethnic backgrounds, I mean Arab and Jewish. But even inside Jewish group, there are some hierarchies. There are, let's say, Ethiopian Jews who reach to Israel. They also face some mistreatment. So that's another good example. So there is no individual level inclusion and there is no group level inclusion. Both collectively and at individual level, the groups are put down in the hierarchy. Their place is lower. Good example. And Mustafa, you are saying that if China allows Uyghur people to become, Han citizens, Han people, if they forget about their background, if they, have this intentional memory loss, that will be individual level inclusion, but group level exclusion. If that's the case, yes, that will be the case. But again, these terms might be misleading because if you are forced to lose your memory, if you are forced, to deny your own culture, that wouldn't be individual level rights. What I mean with individual level inclusion is more like the majority society wants to get you. They want you to become one of them. They want to include you as an individual, but not with your individuality. They want you to have a memory loss. And Omar. Okay, so let's continue with the article, with Omar's comment. So, that kind of regimes, that kind of models are called ethnocracy. Does not grant any collective rights, but also excludes the members of that ethnic group from the political life, sometimes from the cultural sphere, sometimes from the economic life. What I mean with economic life, let's say the state does not provide any collective rights like tax privileges for your ethnic group, but also you are discriminated against. If you want to get a job, you are discriminated. You apply for government jobs, they don't give you a job because you are different. They say you are other. And even in the private sector, your promotion, your vertical mobilization is disabled, is hindered by state policies. This would be economic discrimination. So, this is ethnocracy. Let's continue. A second regime type would be the opposite of this. Liberal multiculturalism. You have individual level inclusion. In other words, you can leave your ethnic community. You don't need to live in a ghetto. You can say that as an Uyghur, I want to be a Han Chinese. I want to live like them. I want to have the same opportunities as they have. But if you want to live as an Uyghur, you are also allowed to do that. Your language is recognized. Politically, you can form political parties. In some cases, you can even get political autonomy. There are degrees of recognition, degrees of collective rights. So, this is called liberal multiculturalism. The group is recognized, but also individuals are recognized as individuals, not just parts of a group. That's the distinction. Maybe we can open this up with examples. An example of this, a real life example. Which ethnic groups in which countries might be enjoying both group rights, but also they're not stuck with their group. They can leave their group. Which societies are like that?
Basque people in Spain. They have
Okay, Basque people in Spain.
they have a sort of autonomy. They have their own rights, but they're also included as a group and both as individuals.
Yeah, so that might be the case, right? In Spain, in northeastern part of Spain, just across the France border, there is a Basque region. This region is populated not exclusively, but it is populated by the Basque people. The Basque people are known to be the oldest living culture of Europe. This is their own claim. They say that they are indigenous Europeans. They came much before the Castilians, much before the Franks or other Germanic tribes. They have their distinct language. And France granted autonomy to the Basque region. Their language is recognized there, and pretty much autonomous area. But if you think that, I'm not happy with this, I want to live like a Castilian. I don't want to go to a Basque teaching school. I don't want to vote for a Basque political party. Then you can also leave your group. And that is called liberal multiculturalism. But there is a caveat here, which is since the Basque community is recognized in a given territory, it's territorialized. It's a little bit different. So if you are a person of Basque origin living in Madrid, then you will not be able to send your school to a Basque teaching school. Your children cannot learn their language in the public school. If you want to do it, you need to go to the Basque region, so it's territorialized. And also, if you are a person of Basque origin in Basque region, it's not easy for you to live like a Castilian person. The example for this would be, even a better example would be Canada. In Canada, there is a region called Quebec. It's a francophone region. In Quebec, because the rest of Canada, they speak English. The majority is the English-speaking Anglophone Canadians. But there is this francophone Canadians, and there is again a territorial designation, Quebec territory. In Quebec, if you are a francophone person, you need to send your kids to the French school. So again, it's not that much individual freedom, because you're assigned to a certain community. You are assigned. If you are assigned, then your individual freedom gets lesser. And let's give another example. Omar, Kurdish in some level in Turkey. Okay, let's talk about Kurds in Turkey separately. But now we will do it in a bit. But let's say Kurds in Iraq. In Iraq, there is this region called Kurdistan. It's a federal region. And if you are Kurd in Kurdistan, your kids go to the Kurdish school. They learn all the classes in Kurdish, which is not the case in Turkey, right? In Turkey, there are no collective recognition. There is no collective recognition of Kurds. So then when community is recognized with some territorial basis, that individual freedoms necessarily get lesser because people are assigned to a certain community, to a certain group. So let's talk about this third type. We talked about ethnocracy, which does not give any rights, any freedoms to individuals inside or outside of their boxes. their ethnic group. For the second type, we said liberal multiculturalism. You can leave your community, but you can mix up with with other people, other ethnic backgrounds. You can stand as an individual with no ethnicity. You have that freedom. That will be liberal multiculturalism. But if you want, you can also become a co-ethnic of your ethnic group. The group is also recognized at the group level. As a third type, we can talk about consociationalism. That's a hard term. Consociationalism. I'll just type it. This one. In consociational regimes or systems, the groups are recognized. So your ethnic community is recognized. And out of your group, you do not exist. You cannot leave your community. You are stuck there. That is consociationalism. In other words, you are not a citizen of the country first. Your first political situation is you are a citizen or a member of your community. That comes first. It's very difficult to cross-cut ethnic boundaries. Individuals don't exist as such. They exist only as members of their respective communities. This is consociationalism. An example of this from real life. Mustafa, Switzerland, tell us about it.
Yes, in Switzerland, but it's more based on language terms. So French-speaking people have their own region, Italian-speaking people have their own region, and I don't know what is the third language. I guess German. Yeah, German-speaking people have their own region, and they have also, at a certain level, they have also their autonomy. Moving from one region to another region is also difficult, not just based on governmental institutions, but also, everything is different.
Thank you, Mustafa. Yeah, that's a very good example. So, the Swiss nation is quite a unique story. There's, of course, the Swiss nation, but it's very hard to define it with a certain cultural community. Because if you are living in Bern, then you are German culturally. Most probably you are a German. They might have other people in that particular part of the country, but the majority. But I don't know, if you live in Zurich, then I don't know, probably you speak French. If you live in Lausanne, then probably you speak Italian. So Italian, German, and French ethnicities coexist. There are even smaller ethnicities too, but the major ones are these three. And each region in the country has an official language, which might be Italian, which might be German, which might be French. And the Francophones are not maybe 100%, not exclusively stuck in their Francophone community, but pretty much that's the picture. By the way, these four categories are ideal types. In real, you don't see, let's say, very extreme things like Nazi Germany, right? There are other, let's say, ethnocratic regimes, but none of them is as extreme as Nazi Germany. Or in liberal multiculturalism. We are saying that you can leave your community or you can stay with your community. Both individual and collective rights are granted, but there are different variations. Empirically, it's more confusing than that. But in the abstract way, they are more ideal types. So in the Switzerland, that's a good example. So there are such mutually exclusive communities, ethnic communities, and politically, but more culturally, not economically, not politically, but more culturally, you are assigned to one of them. So your kids will go to that school. Your kids will learn that language. But the good thing about Switzerland, they are capable of handling multiple languages. So it's not like they cannot understand each other. There are some communication problems, but they are good with multilingual education. So good example, Switzerland. Is there any more? Is there any closer example to the ideal type consultationalism? So you are completely stuck with your community.
I think the Belgium is the same case, where in the northern part, I think the Dutch populated and southern part French populated. I may be mistaken, but it's kind of this kind of governing style, and because they have proportional election system, their parliament also populated with this kind of division, I think.
Very good example, the quota system. Even in representation in the national parliament, your ethnic community has a certain assigned seats there. So let's say, as a Flemish person living in northern Belgium, you vote for Flemish parties. As a Wallon people, as a Francophone person, you vote for Wallon parties. And they have Brussels. Brussels is kind of bicommunal capital. That's the third region. But the other regions are Wallon and Flemish regions. Where is Batuhan? We had a Belgian student in class. Batuhan, are you here? No, he's not here. He will tell us in detail about what's going on in Belgium because he's a Belgian student. But yeah, Belgium is another example. What about Lebanon? Actually, the term was crafted for Lebanon, for the Lebanese politics. Lebanon is the ideal type consultational society. In Belgium, there is Brussels that cross-cuts ethnic lines. In Switzerland, again, it's not very extremely differentiated. But in Lebanon, you can talk about 4 almost 100% differentiated categories. There are the Shia people, the Sunni people, the Maronites, the Catholic people, and the Druze people. There are 4 major communities in Lebanon, in Lebanese politics. If you are a Shia person, you are stuck with the Shia community. You vote for Shia parties. You have seats in the parliament. Even in public offices, you have a quota for each ethnic community. Even for the top leadership of the country, the president of the country needs to be Maronite. But the prime minister needs to be a Sunni person. And the head of the army needs to come from a certain ethnic group. Then the speaker of the parliament must come from a certain ethnic group. That's pretty much segregated. Politically, that is the case, but also culturally. As a Shia person, your kids get the Shia education. Their schools are different. Their neighborhoods are different. Maybe in Beirut you can see different communities, but even there, the streets, the narrower neighborhoods are quite distinguished. So, this is pretty much the closest case for an ideal type consultationalism. Some people say the same for Iraq. In Iraq, it's a tri-communal society now. There's one federal region of Kurdistan, but the rest of the country is also bicommunal, Shia Arabs and Sunni Arabs. They're pretty much segregated in every aspect of life, politically and culturally. Another example that I'm missing now.
What about the case of Bosnia?
Yeah, very good example. What about Bosnia, Mustafa?
As far as I know, it's divided in 3 parts: is Croatians, Serbians, and Bosnians, and also they take turns in presidential system. It was an agreement of 1992, if I'm not wrong. They also have their own regions, certain level of autonomy for each region, the same thing for their schools, public institutions, etc.
A very good example. So, Bosnia had this horrible war from 92 to 95 for over 3 years. That was a horrible war. And afterwards, they made this deal. The Bosnia-Herzegovina, the country was formed based on 3 communities: Serbs, Croatians, and Bosniaks, or Bosnian Muslims. They have their own territories, by the way, inside the country. It's again territorial. It doesn't have to be territorial for constitutionalism, but that's the standard picture. Usually, it's territorialized. So in the Bosnian case, all the political seats are allocated either proportionately, so each community has a quota there, or on a rotating basis. They take turns. And even, when you want to go from, I don't know, the Bosniak area to the Serbian area, there is a border inside the country. And there are some Bosnian Serb police officers to check your documents. You can't just enter the part of that country. So that's also a consultational system in that regard. Good example. And let's talk about Omar. Okay, Omar, what about Iran? Let's hear you.
Yes, Hocam, we can give Iran also as an example. For example, we see in Iran like Azeris, Arabs, Baluchis, and we also see the territorial separation of each of them. Some of them are concentrated on the borders, and some of them are more close to the center, and they have different access to political power. They are not allowed to be represented in the parliament by the same quotas. So
Very good. Good example. So in Iran also there are certain regions. In Iran, there are Arabs, Kurds, Baluchis, Turks, Azeri Turks. There are such communities. So the territorial distinction is not very straightforward, like we see in Belgium, because the dominant ethnicity, the Farsi-speaking ethnicity, the Persians, they dominate the country, but still there is cultural autonomy in certain cases. For Arabs, for Baluchis, let's say, it's very clear. So, but the Iran's official policy, in terms of languages, they try to accommodate different languages, but there are certain, of course, critics. If you talk a Baluchi from Iran, you will hear stories about discrimination, let's say. Baluchis think that they are excluded from the system. Some Arabs, some Kurds feel the same way. Turks are better in that sense. It's partly because they are really crowded in Iran, and partly because they are in peace with the Farsi, with the Persian identity. Not Farsi, but with the Persian identity. That Shia identity is quite strong. That cross-cuts the linguistic lines. So the Turks of Iran and the Farsi-speaking community, the majority dominant ethnicity in Iran, they meet in the Shia faith. And I think from that regard, they don't have such ethnic problems which you would expect from a country like Iran. But that's right. Their schooling system, their overall cultural policies, to a degree, accommodate different cultures. I wouldn't call it a consultational system, but there are certain traces, there are certain similarities. And as I said, we don't have purely consultational arrangements, purely liberal multiculturalist arrangements. Usually, the countries, the communities, they are somewhere between. You might say this policy is more constitutional and this policy is more liberal multiculturalist. Maybe you should look at on the policy basis. Good examples. Now, we saw ethnocracy, we saw liberal multiculturalism, we saw constitutionalism. There is one more. At the group level, no recognition. But at the individual level, there is inclusion. And this might be called civic assimilationism. Some people call it civic republicanism. So in this system, as an individual, you are free. You can vote in the elections. In the economic life, you can apply for government jobs. You can apply for military. You can even get an arm and fight for the country. And the culture side, let's leave it now, because I will get back to it. So, this system is called civic assimilation. In other words, the state wants the members of a particular ethnic group to assimilate into the majority. If you talk about culture, the state wants you to learn and to speak the official language of the country, the majority's language. And there is no special treatment for your group, no group recognition, no collective rights granted to the group, no autonomy. Everybody is same, no matter what their ethnic background is. This is called civic assimilationism. Again, let's give some examples. Maybe with the examples, we will have a better picture of this. And examples of this system. Okay, here I expect to hear your answer. So give me an example of a community in a country. Omar says Kurds in Turkey. Let's look at it. At the political level, and yeah, we will get back to Catalans, but let's start with Kurds in Turkey. About looking for you, you're here. In the Belgium case, I was about to ask a question to you. But anyway, let's start with Kurds in Turkey. In the economic life, there is no, I don't know, separate Kurdish syndicates. There is no separate Kurdish trade unions. Kurds, as individuals, can become part of the entire economic system. Politically, in a full civic assimilationist, purely civic assimilationist system, you cannot have ethnic parties. So HDP cannot exist. But in a full scale, let's say, consultation system, there will be territorial autonomy. Turkey doesn't give that. So there's no Kurdish autonomous region. There are ethnic parties. There's some ethnic recognition in that sense, some traces of recognition or acceptance, in other words, not recognition, but acceptance might be a better word. So ethnic parties can function. It's not purely civic republican, but it doesn't recognize the Kurdistan region as a political autonomous region. So in that regard, it's civic assimilationist, civic republican. And also, it allows Kurds to vote for non-Kurdish parties. There's individual level inclusion in that regard. So in that sense, and there are no quotas in the parliament, There is no rotating system. There is no quota system in the parliament. So maybe not 100%, but close to it. It's politically a civic republican or civic assimilationist system. Politically and economically and culturally, in a purely civic assimilation system, there will be no elective Kurdish course, no private Kurdish language institute. That will be too much. We don't see such extreme measures in civic republican systems. So none of these civic assimilation systems are 100% assimilationist. So in Turkey, you can learn Kurdish with your own means, or there are some practical problems, but if you are lucky, with elective courses in public school. But again, the Kurdish community, with its own distinct culture, is not recognized. So the article focused on the political aspect, but in this lecture, I'm also bringing in the cultural and economic aspects too. So it's a good example. I would say it is a civic assimilationist system. It used to be pure civic assimilationist in the past. Politically, the ethnic parties were being banned one after another, and culturally, Kurdish was banned, forbidden. There used to be no, state broadcasting channel in Kurdish language, TRT Kurdi or TRT Shesh, which is quite a recent development. There used to be no Kurdish newspapers in Kurdish language, no Kurdish elective courses. There used to be no, Kurdish language tutoring institutions. These are all recent developments. You wouldn't be able to name your kids with traditional Kurdish names, like Rojin, let's say. So, from that regard, these are steps away from civic assimilationism toward liberal multiculturalism. But still, Kurdish is not recognized by the state. So it's not consociational, for sure, politically, culturally, economically. But from the cultural perspective, it is somewhere between liberal multiculturalism and consociationism. Civic republicanism. In the past, it used to be purely civic assimilationist on the cultural and political level. Well, now there are more examples. Batuan, what about Catalans in Spain? Tell us about that. I think there's some delay in the sound. Or maybe Batuan cannot hear us now. Okay, Batuan. I get it. Batuan's mic is not working. So Catalans, again, is it liberal multicultural? Is it consociational? Not a pure form. But they have an autonomous region, Catalonia. They have newspapers in their own language. So somewhere between, not a pure form. I wouldn't call it civic assimilationist, but it has partly consociational, let's say, aspects and partly liberal multicultural aspects. So I'm not very familiar with the Catalonia case, other than following Barcelona. That's their national team, let's call it. But I would say it's somewhere between liberal multicultural and consociational arrangement, somewhere in between. And Ahmet Enes, what about Latins in the USA? Is your mic working, Enes? Yes, Batuan, yes. Catalonia has more collective rights. That's for sure, compared to Turkey's Kurds. For one thing, they have their autonomous region, right? So that's a lot. So that is a much greater recognition in terms of collective rights. In Turkey, Kurds don't have collective rights. In Turkey, Kurds have individual rights. So Turkey is not does not pursue consultation arrangements. And Enes, yes, Enes's mic is not working. Enes said Latins in the USA. Actually, the United States is a good example. It's almost a textbook example of civic assimilationism. In the USA, there is no territorial autonomy to any community. For Latins, for for African Americans, no territorial autonomy. And that is understandable because there is no ethnic group which is majority in certain parts of the country. Yes, Hispanic communities are a majority in some southern states, but it's like 51, 52% of the society. Yes, there are some black neighborhoods, but they are small. They are not contagious. It's here and there and here, like ghettos. But there is no region with predominantly, let's say, populated by a certain ethnic group. Let's if you go to Hakkari, it's predominantly Kurdish. In the USA, there is no state like that. Even in places like New Mexico, in Arizona, in Texas, they are not predominantly Hispanic. Either whites are in majority, or let's say Anglo-Saxons, or they are pretty much close. So, and there are no Hispanic schools. Oh, by the way, there's a difference between Latin and Hispanic. Hispanic means Spanish speaking. So immigrants and their children, they are Hispanic. Latin means having Latin origins, but not necessarily Spanish speaking. They might be speaking Italian or even French. Let's say if you are an immigrant from Haiti to the United States, you are a Latin, but not Hispanic, because you speak French, not Spanish, but you have Latin origin. In the United States, Hispanics are usually mentioned about, not Latins per se, but Spanish-speaking Latins, Hispanics. And there are no Hispanic schools, by the way. You have to send your kid to the English school. So your kid needs to classes, math, and other classes in English language. There is no, let's say, schools granted to certain ethnic groups. So in that sense, the United States is pretty much civic assimilationist. Actually, the country is called melting pot. That's the idea. People coming in the country from all these different ethnic backgrounds, the idea is to mix them up. And eventually, the output is American, not Hispanic, not black. The idea is the outcome must be American. But of course, no identity, no national identity is free from culture. So that American is white, Anglo-Saxon, and Protestant. If not, then life will be easy again. It won't be difficult. There are freedoms, but still, that's the standard American. If your skin color is not white, then life will not be that easy. If you are Hispanic, again, life will not be that easy. Or if you are Asian, same thing. And for that reason, Asian, Hispanic immigrants, they give their kids names which will not resonate about their ethnic background. Let's say if your father's name is Jose, then your name might be John. They don't want it to keep ethnic tone. Same thing goes with Asians. They want non-ethnic names for their kids to avoid discrimination. So, good example. Now, we talked about 4 types of regimes or systems of treatment. These are ideal types, but empirically, as I said, there are no pure types. Even the most consultational system, in certain aspects, economically, culturally, or politically, might have some traces of liberal multiculturalism, or might have some traces of civic assimilationism. But theoretically, as heuristic devices, it's important to know these concepts, but empirically, be open for nuances. Empirically, it's more complicated than that. Batuhan, I just saw your comment. So since Batuhan's mic is not working, I will read the comment. Hocam, can we divide it like Mexicans, Cubans, etc. instead of saying Latins? Because one is more different than the other, even though they speak the same language. Yes, we can. You can talk about Mexican Americans, Cuban Americans. Mexican and Cuban societies are both Latin, by the way, and they are also both Hispanic. They are Spanish-speaking Latins, but coming from different countries. Their neighborhoods are also different. Cubans are mostly centered in Florida, and Mexicans, they tend to be more in New Mexico, Arizona, California, Texas. They're also political attitudes different. All Hispanics, on average, vote for Democrats, but Cubans, on average, vote for Republicans. Cubans are quite unique. They are the only minority in the United States which do not vote for Democrats. That's quite unique. Cubans are pro-Republican on average. And can you guess why? Why do you think Cubans are different from the rest of the minorities? Why do you think they, on average, they support Republicans? Any guess?
Cold War case?
Cold War, and I also saw Batuhan's comment too. Yes, Mustafa, Batuhan, you are right. It's about the Cuban Revolution, because the Cubans in the United States probably, some of them came for other reasons, but most of them came as political refugees. They ran away from the revolution. So they hate anything about the left. That's why they are different from the rest of minority communities in the United States. Good. So now the thing to keep in mind, yes, in some countries, there are standard procedures for all minorities. But in some countries, different groups are treated differently. So the unit of analysis here is not the country, it's the group. Let's say, in one country, one group can be treated with consultational arrangements. They can be granted quota system. They can be granted their own schooling system. They can have, I don't know, their official holidays, such things. But other communities might be subject to, I don't know, civic assimilation. So let's give an example. Any examples of such? In the same country, different ethnic communities are subject to different rules. Let's say one is ethnocracy, the other one is consultational, the other one is liberal multiculturalist. Any examples you might think of? No? No example? Think about, I don't know. Look, I will give you an example then. In Iraq, Kurds have their own territory, right? Kurdistan. But the Turks of Iraq don't have it, or Turkmens. That's differential treatment. Which makes sense because Turks are not that crowded. The Kurds of Iraq, they outnumber Turks. What about Lebanon? Yeah, in Lebanon, if you are one of those four communities, let's remember them, Maronite or Catholic Christian, and Druze, Shia and Sunni. If you are one of them, then you will have your own seats, allocated seats for the elections. all these top seats in the bureaucracy will be allocated, will be shared between these groups. But if you are a member of a fifth community, then you will get none of this. And that fifth community, let's say, might be Armenians. There's the Armenian community in Lebanon. But the thing is, since their number is not very big, they are not recognized as the fifth community. If that's the case, then probably you will go with the Maronites. Yes, the president is Maronite by constitution, and the PM must be Sunni. So the PM is Hariri, is a Sunni guy, and the president is, what was his name, Michel something. The president is Maronite. And like Iraq, same with Iraq, right? In Iraq, the prime minister must be Arab, and because of population ratio, that happens to be Shia Arab. But president is Kurdish. Barham Salih, and before him, Jalal Talabani, they are Kurds. You wouldn't expect a Kurd to become the president, because in any kind of election, since ethnic identity matters a lot in political behavior in Iraq, in each election they would vote for Shia Arabs, for presidency, for prime ministry, for the speaker of the parliament. But by convention, they have this. The president comes from the Kurdish origin. So the Shia people do not nominate candidates for the spot. So this is the allocation based on the ethnic line. Or another example, Cyprus. Before the Cyprus War, Cyprus became independent in the year of 1960. Before it was a British colony. In 1960, it became independent. And its constitution was written on strictly constitutional terms. For example, the constitution said that in Cyprus there are two communities, Turks and Greeks. The president has to be Cypriot, Greek, and the vice president had to be Cypriot Turk or Turkish Cypriot. So they allocated these seats, the presidency and vice presidency, they were allocated to different groups. It was a bicommunal society. Turks and Greeks had different schools. If you are a Turk, you go to Turkish school in Cyprus. If you are a Greek, you go to Greek school in Cyprus. By the way, that's really funny because the society was not like this before 74. They lived in mixed neighborhoods. Now Turks are in northern Cyprus and Greeks are in southern Cyprus. But it wasn't like this. It became like this with population transfer in 1974 with the intervention of Turkey. Before, even some villages were mixed. Yes, there were Turkish villages, Greek villages, but there were also mixed villages. At the city level, they were all mixed. The funny thing, there are 5 big cities. There were 5 big cities in Cyprus, and Turks and Greeks had different mayors. Let's say in Istanbul, Turks vote for a mayor, Turkish mayor, and Greeks vote for Greek mayor. And Greeks, in order to deal with their affairs, they are subject to the Greek mayor, and Turks are subject to the Turkish mayor. They had different official holidays. Turks celebrated holidays of Turkey, and Greeks celebrated the holidays of mainland Greece. And let's say the Turkish Cypriot schools had Turkish flag and the Cyprus flag together, and Greek Cypriot schools had Greek flag and Cyprus flag together. So that's quite unique and very, very consultational in that sense. This did not work out because the Greek Cypriots, they thought that that's not fair. They were majority, but Turks could veto any decision. The vice president had the veto power. So they had to take decisions together. And unilaterally, the Greek side changed the constitution, which was not legal, by the way. The Turks vetoed it, but the Greek side did not recognize the Turkish veto, and it got nasty. There were even some physical violence, discrimination against Turks. And then Turkey intervened in 1974. Okay, Omar. Omar says, I lost the screen, sorry. Omar says, nobis in Egypt. Ah, that's interesting. I don't know about them. They are located in the south of Egypt, Egyptian citizens, but they are not represented enough politically and economically. So Omar, tell us about nobis. I don't know about them.
Yeah, novice, they are citizens of Egypt. They are recognized as Egyptian citizens, but in the parliament and in the economic life, they are marginalized and fragmented from the urban cities.
Are they Arabic speaking?
Yes, yes,
Are they Muslim?
yes. They are Muslims and they are Arabs, but they are recognized as not northern Africans, but as sub-Saharan.
Okay, so they are black. Their skin color
Yes.
is black.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So you see, guys, so ethnicity, in this case, it might even be called race, needs some boundary makers. Sometimes it is your language, sometimes it is your religion, sometimes both. In Cyprus, it was both. Turks and Greeks had different languages and different faiths, different mainlands. It was very different. But sometimes it's neither. So this Nobi case that Omar just told us, same language, Arabic, same faith, Islam, probably even Sunni Islam. But in this case, skin color is different. Probably because, Egypt is in Africa, right? Its southern neighbor is Sudan. So its southern neighbors are predominantly black. It's no surprise that there are some black people living in Egypt. So in this case, they have a different name just because they have a different skin color. And same thing goes with Balochistan in Iran, let's say. Baluchis, yes, their language is also different, but they also tend to be darker than the majority of the society, Iranian society. So it's easier to spot on. So some boundary makers are visible. Some others are less so. Good example, Omar. Thank you. So now think about these, pure conceptual categories, but empirically, they are pretty much mixed. They are not pure. We said that. And we also said that in each country, there might be different regimes for different ethnic groups. The country might pursue civic assimilationist policies on a certain ethnic group. On the second minority, they might pursue liberal multicultural policies. On the third minority group, the same state might pursue, let's say, consultational arrangements, policies. Any comments, any questions so far? Anything not clear or any I just gave a pause in case sounded late. Okay, Rafi, thanks for the confirmation. Okay, guys, now past 2 weeks we covered the demand side of ethnicity, and this week we covered the supply side of it, how the state treats ethnic groups. And don't forget, everything we see in terms of conceptions and theories, they're a little bit abstract. They're a little bit ideal types, pure types, but real life is more complicated than that. In real life, you are not either happy or sad. Sometimes you are both. In real life, you are not either, consociational or liberal multicultural. Sometimes you are both. But even if empirically, real life is more complicated, more nuanced, more colorful, still it helps to know this conceptual and theoretical background. It makes it easier to understand this empirical complexity. This is what ideal types are for. They are heuristic devices to make the world look simple so that we can understand it. So always pay attention to this conceptual clarity, but also pay attention to empirical richness, empirical nuances. And with that, we conclude our class, we conclude our semester. Who knows, maybe we conclude Shehir. So this class might be the end of many things. For some of them, we are sure. This is the last session of our class. For the university, we are not sure yet. We will see. But in case I don't see you around anymore, in case you graduate, in case you stay, but the university doesn't stay, take care, guys, and hopefully we will see each other around. And let me know. I feel very happy when I hear good news from my students. When you got in, I don't know, when you got a good job, when you got in a good MA program. I don't know, when you marry and get twins. Any good news, let me know. I feel happy when I hear good things about my students. Thank you, guys. And hopefully I will grade your reaction papers, but pretty much everybody in class is already done with everything. You have done anything you can so far. For now, it's time to rest and focus on your other classes. You have exams and other assignments. But for this class, that's all. Now it's my part to grade your assignments and upload your letter grades. Okay, that's not a farewell. I'm sure we will run into each other somewhere, sometime. See you guys.